up, Cucks? It's your boy, the Hater, up in this piece, and it's now time for Hater on the Road once again, this time with Ridge the dog next to me. So if you hear a dog barking or making dog noises, that's what's up, Cucks. This video is going to be about the fall of TNA. We just did a video on the rise of TNA, so it's only appropriate that we now talk about what happened that ruined TNA once and for all. Well, as with most failures in life, it's difficult to point to one or two things that caused TNA to fail. However, we're going to do just that. We're going to point to a few things because that's how we roll. Now, first things first, okay? Let's be honest. First things first. TNA failed, and I hate to admit this, when they started over-relying on old stars. Now, I can hear the neckbeards grimacing. I can hear the neck fat flapping. I know what some of you may be thinking right now. You're probably thinking, well, Hater, if that's how you feel, then why do you keep saying that old guys today are good? Well, cuckolds, the reasoning is actually quite simple. Primarily, first and foremost, if you will, the old guys of today are also the old guys of yesterday, right? It's still the same people. You know what I mean? Like it's the Kurt Angles, the Rocks, the Stone Colds, and so forth. You know what I mean? So with all that being said, it's a bit different if you consider those people versus, the old guys of the TNA time, right? And if you compare them to the current guys, that's probably the bigger differentiator, right? So let's say, for example, Sting comes back today in AEW. Sting should be champion in AEW because the alternative is Swerve Strickland and Daniel Bryan. You see what I'm saying? Sting is better than both those guys combined by 1,000 times. He's at this age, motherfuckers, at 65, Cucks, at 65, Sting is more believable as a champion than Swerve is in his 30s. Like, Swerve is like a regular guy. You know what I mean? Sting is a big, strong-looking dude, even in his 60s, let alone in his 30s and 40s, where it's not even worth discussing, right? It's like if you look at Sting in his prime and Swerve Strickland in his prime, you think it's like two people from different species, you know what I mean? You think like, oh, Sting's like 100 times bigger, 100 times better looking, 100 times more muscular. He's better in every capacity than Daniel Bryan and Swerve Strickland, you know what I mean? But when TNA was coming up, there were a lot of young guys that ended up becoming, I don't want to say legends because it's hard to say that Samoa Joe is a legend, but you know what I mean? They ended up becoming big deals like AJ Styles. AJ Styles is a guy that ended up beating Cena. You know what I mean? You have people like Kevin Owens, people like that were in the indies. And people like this, when the old guys would come, Kevin Owens was never in TNA, thank God. But you know what I mean? People like AJ Styles, people like Christopher Daniels, people like Samoa Joe, who could have been a star, but didn't become one because he had to make way for Scott Steiner and Kevin Nash, whom I love, but nevertheless, the idea is you have to also push Samoa Joe, right? Basically, TNA should be doing, or should have done, I should say, what AEW is doing now. And AEW now should be doing what TNA did, and having no faith in people like Swerve Strickland or fucking, like Hook, you know what I mean? And push people like Sting. Sting should be the AEW champion. That just the headline that you're gonna get from it is worth it, right? Sting having a one-day title reign is more impactful than MJF, Adam Page, and Swerve Strickland's title reigns combined, motherfuckers. Nobody cares about these jobbers. So, back to TNA. The truth is that TNA hired a lot of these older guys and gave them too much screen time. Now, in my opinion, one of the best stables of all time, I might even think it's the best stable of all time, is the Main Event Mafia. That made sense. That was really well done because at the very least, even if you give these guys 5 segments, you could put all of them in 5 segments, right? Versus having to give like 2 segments to Kurt Angle, 2 segments to Sting, 2 segments to Scott Steiner, 2 segments to Booker T, whatever the case may be, right? And also, it should be noted that some of these guys weren't even that old. Like Kurt Angle, during the Main Event Mafia run, he was like in his late 30s. You know what I mean? He was like the same age as Cody Rhodes now. Imagine that shit. Kurt Angle was already a legend in Main Event Mafia when he was Cody Rhodes' age. If they did the Main Event Mafia again, Cody Rhodes would be part of the young guys group that's fighting them. So would Swerve, so would like all these other people in their 30s because none of them have accomplished anything, right? That was the whole point of Main Event Mafia, but more on that in a different video. Now, the big mistake that TNA made, in my opinion, and I hate to say it because Hulk Hogan is by far the biggest draw in the history of wrestling. But the reality is that whole Immortal faction, you know, to me, that's what put the nail in the coffin, because that shit was just so poorly done in every capacity imaginable, right? First of all, it wasn't even Hulk Hogan's faction, really. Like, the head of the faction was pretty much Eric Bischoff, right? You had Hogan and Ric Flair being there because, you know, Ric Flair's Fortune group also joined them. By the way, Fortune, what a stupid name. It was like Fortune, but it was spelled like F-O-U-R-T-U-N-E because there's 4 of them. And then they added like a 5th guy, you know? Whatever, it is what it is. The point is that Eric Bischoff took center stage. And Eric Bischoff is not entertaining. Like, Eric Bischoff might have a decent mind for wrestling, you know? In my opinion, he really doesn't, you know what I mean? I don't think he gets it at all. Yeah, he beat Vince 83 weeks in a row, but that's because he had, like, unlimited money and a lot of big stars, including Hulk Hogan, right? This is not going to work when Hulk Hogan's not wrestling. This is not going to work when Eric Bischoff is out there trying to put over his son, who sucks, by the way, right? As a matter of fact, the way that the whole, you know, Eric Bischoff, I'm going to call it the Eric Bischoff era of TNA, the way that fucking thing started and went forward was atrocious. Up until that point, TNA was amazing. I would argue, literally, that up until and including the first episode where they went on Monday nights, they were better than WWE, in my personal opinion. But nobody promised Eric Bischoff as part of the equation, right? They're like, Hogan debuts. And then that was one of the best episodes of TV ever. Because, like, Jeff Hardy came back. Fucking Nigel McGuinness as Desmond Wolfe debuted. Ric Flair randomly appeared. X-Pac and, and Kevin Nash came back. I think Scott Hall also was involved. You know what I mean? I think Kevin Nash was already there. But X-Pac and Scott Hall came back, right? You had all these people debuting. Like, things were moving forward, you know? Meanwhile, you had, like, established stars like Kurt Angle, you know, at a certain level. Eric Young was coming up. You had, like, AJ Styles, who was the champion, right? And then he sided with Ric Flair and all the other stuff. And this could have led to something amazing. But what do they do? First thing they do is they drop the title. They have AJ drop the title, like, a few weeks after this to, like, fucking Rob Van Dam. Like, AJ Styles, at the time, in my opinion, was not only a bigger star than Van Dam, but he was a more credible world champion because he's Mr. TNA. That's the one thing they did right. I was afraid that when this stuff was happening, they would put the title on, like, Kurt Angle. You know, just to be like, oh, okay, like the guy that you recognize as the champion, or Sting. But they did the right thing. They put it on AJ Styles. AJ Styles deserved that, and primarily, it made sense for AJ Styles to be the champion because he's like Mr. TNA. He represents TNA, right? Whereas the other people don't. Now, another thing they did. They decided at some point that it was a good idea, I don't know why, to, like, debut other random people. Now, it's no secret that one of my favorite wrestlers ever is Val Venus. However, I'll never forget when Val Venus debuted as Sean Morley in TNA, with the Val Venus gimmick, by the way, and he pretty much squashed, for lack of a better word, Christopher Daniels, who I had envisioned as being one of the top guys in this new era. You know, I envisioned him as having feuds with people like Kurt Angle in the coming months to establish the new guys, right? But instead, they have him drop the Val Venus. Now, if you're going to push Val Venus, sure. But Val Venus was there for 2 weeks and left. All he did was he came and he buried Christopher Daniels. You know what I mean? So it's this kind of bullshit that ruined this company, right? Abyss was featured prominently as a monster in the lead up to this, right? Or in the lead up to Immortal after Hogan debuted, right? After Hogan debuted, you know, the question still was, what's Hogan going to do? And when he turned heel, that was a big deal. But Abyss was pushed in these early months, and then he was relegated to being a complete lackey, a complete afterthought in this show that was, in many ways, built around him for a few months. But the worst thing that happened, by far, like I said, is Eric Bischoff. And here's why. While Hulk Hogan was being advertised, that was the big draw, right? It's like, holy shit, motherfucks. Hulk Hogan is back in wrestling. He's going to wrestle a match. We all know he's going to wrestle a match at some point. But Hulk Hogan is back in wrestling, right? You had people like Mick Foley. You had people like Ric Flair coming in there, right? You had all these people coming in. Ric Flair eventually managing AJ Styles, who was the champion, and really boosting AJ Styles' credibility, You had everything you could possibly have fucking wanted, man. But the one thing that you didn't need and was completely unnecessary was the introduction of Eric Bischoff. Nobody wanted to see Eric Bischoff. Now, I don't have a strong opinion on Eric Bischoff one way or the other. I mean, to be completely honest, I never understood what the big deal was. Like, sure, he's like a Vince Russo in the sense that he understands TV, he understands TV production, he understands a few things. Like, he's not a complete degenerate. Like, he's not as bad as like Adam Pearce as an authority figure either, you know? He had a good run as Raw GM. Like, Eric Bischoff has some things that are actually quite interesting in his resume. However, the bigger problem here, of course, is that Eric Bischoff, for whatever reason, you can call it what you want to call it, but the facts speak for themselves. Eric Bischoff is someone that, you know, when he's on screen, he, like, it's part of his personality almost, you know, and I gotta give him props for this, but he's someone that, like, he feels like he's the most important guy on the scene many times, right? And he shouldn't be at this point, right? He came out of nowhere. He came in there, they changed it to 4 sides. He came in as like the wrestling creative genius, which is silly because he didn't really do anything creative. Like, he got beaten by Vince McMahon. So they should have gone with what was working. Whoever the fuck was doing it, Scott D'Amore, I don't know. Whoever was behind the scenes doing it with the 6 sides, they should have stuck with that person. But nothing cannot be forgiven, right? Even bringing Eric Bischoff in as an important and unannounced, by the way, element of this new era, right? It's almost like Hulk Hogan came and Eric Bischoff was just there with him. Like, nobody said, oh, next week Eric Bischoff debuts. Nobody said, nobody cared. It's just that he took away so much. It's just like Bischoff segment after Bischoff segment after Bischoff segment. And, like I said, even this can be forgiven. But, motherfucks, what cannot be forgiven is the way that all these things culminated, right? Once Hulk Hogan was a figure, the storyline quickly became Hulk Hogan and Eric Bischoff pretty much get Dixie Carter to sign the company over to them. Dixie Carter thinks she's signing essentially release papers to get Abyss fired. Abyss, who's basically been this like monster, this menace, just killing people left and right. You know, she wants to get him fired, so she signs the document without reading it. Now, lucky for y'alls, the hater has passed the bar exam, and the hater knows a thing or two about contract law. This would not be a valid contract, right? One of the things, and there's many reasons why it wouldn't be valid, but the main reason is in contracts, there's 4 elements. You need an offer, right? An acceptance, consideration, which there was nothing here. There was no consideration here at all. And more importantly, a meeting of the minds. Meaning that the 2 people or 2 parties or 3 parties or whatever that are signing the contract must be aware of what they're agreeing to. You can't trick someone into signing a contract, cucks. Now, I understand that none of the people involved are lawyers, so I'm not expecting them to like figure this out. But someone should have said, hey, this is fucking stupid, right? Think about it. In order to transfer something to someone and for the contract to have value, you need consideration as well. Someone needs to pay someone something or give something up. In the context of this contract, Dixie Carter is giving up her company, right? So that's consideration. But what is Eric Bischoff or what is Hulk Hogan giving up in exchange for this, right? If you're not giving anything up, it's not a contract. It's called a gift. You dumb motherfucks, being TNA, right? If I sign a contract that says, I'll give you $1,000, and there's nothing else there that says that, and you'll give me something else in return, I don't have to give you the $1,000 just because I signed. Yeah, this is like, you learn this in like the first week of contract, maybe second week of contract law in law school. But that's neither here nor there. You would need one person to say this is fucking stupid, right? This is just stupid. But anyways, also, you know, it would be invalid for a number of other reasons, like she signed under duress, etc., etc. But the point is, this was the storyline. And once this whole circle jerk happened, Hogan and Bischoff turned heel. They turned Jeff Hardy heel. That could have been a great run. It wasn't, because Jeff Hardy got high and screwed up a pay-per-view main event. But whatever, even that can be forgiven, right? Long story short, after Immortal debuts, they were going to have Immortal versus the main event Mafia, which would have been awesome, but it was too late. Booker T, Kevin Nash, they went on to the E, motherfucks. They went on to the E, and all we had now was Sting, Angle, and Scott Steiner, which would have sufficed, honestly. You could have just done that. But the problem is, the main event Mafia now had people like fucking Samoa Joe joined in the first iteration. Then like Magnus joins. Like all these fucking jobbers, you know what I mean? Like Samoa Joe was never a main eventer ever in his career, right? Magnus wasn't even a mid-carder, right? You have like Matt Morgan being like, I want to be part of the main event mafia. And it's like, you've never been in a main event. Like the understanding of the main event mafia is that they're all legit main eventers. Even when they try to get the Dudley boys to join in the first run of the main event mafia, I remember as a kid thinking like, yo, I love the Dudleys, but they're not main eventers like at all. They've never been in one main event. Like I don't think they've been in one main event their entire careers. Ever, motherfucks. Ever. Not once. And why are they in the main event mafia? Yeah? They're not world champions. They're tag team champions, and that's not how it works. Nevertheless, this didn't pan out, so Immortal had to start feuding with Fortune, right? This is where the Bobby Roode push came, which in my opinion was misplaced because it came out of nowhere. A lot of people think of this as like a great moment for Bobby Roode, but it wasn't, in my opinion. Because what happened was, all of a sudden one day, Bobby Roode is like, I'm a main eventer. What? Says who, motherfucker? Says who? You're a mid-card tag jobber. Now imagine if like in the middle of the Attitude Era, all of a sudden, fucking Headbanger Mosh says, you know what, I'm gonna be a main eventer, and people take it seriously. Now I understand Bobby Roode is not Headbanger Mosh, but the point stands regardless, motherfucks. But as I said, the end, in my opinion, the end of Immortal and the end of this period, because after that, then we had the Bobby Roode era, which was also not that good, but the end of this, to me, happens when Eric Bischoff and Hulk Hogan are leave TV. I don't remember, if I'm being honest, why Hulk Hogan left. He must have just not signed another contract. But I don't know. I don't recall when Hulk Hogan's last appearance was and why he went away. But I do recall why Eric Bischoff went away. And this is the part that I can never forgive. Throughout the Immortal run, right, which in my opinion killed TNA, throughout this entire storyline circle jerk, we had a crooked referee theme, a crooked referee plot. There was a referee by the name of Jackson James, if I believe his name was, and he was actually in real life Garrett Bischoff, Eric Bischoff's son. Now, I'm not a fan of nepotism in wrestling, you know, or in general, but I understand it. And I don't think that Eric Bischoff's son should be denied an opportunity just because he's Eric Bischoff's son. As a matter of fact, his daddy worked hard to get him to get to where he was, so I'm okay with Garrett Bischoff getting an opportunity and even getting a nepotistic push. I'm not against it in the slightest. My recording device here. However, I think there came a point, nevertheless, where the feud cannot be forgiven here, in my personal opinion, is very simple. The whole idea of Garrett Bischoff now becoming like the number one star that comes out of the fucking entire Hulk Hogan Eric Bischoff run is inexcusable. I remember that there was like, here's what I remember. There was a Lethal Lockdown match. I think RVD was involved. I think AJ Styles was involved. But long story short, there were two people, Eric and Garrett Bischoff. And these guys led the factions, right? Or led the teams. I think Eric Bischoff even participated in the match because I remember Garrett hitting him with a guitar and possibly pinning his monkey ass. Now, after doing this, Garrett Bischoff got rid of Eric Bischoff. But, like, nepotism should only go so far. You ruined a company to give Garrett Bischoff an opportunity. And even if Garrett Bischoff had become the next John Cena, which obviously did not happen, it wouldn't have mattered anyways, right? It wouldn't have mattered anyways because the reality is that Garrett Bischoff didn't become a star, and, you know, even if he had, you know, like, who cares, right? Who cares if he had become a star? You still ruined a company to make him a star. And that's the part that I think cannot be forgiven. You know, I get it. Eric Bischoff didn't think it was going to ruin the company, and I'm sure he probably would deny that it ruined the company. But let's be honest. We all know how that shit went down. Once Bischoff left, and once Hogan left, right? You knew, as a viewer, that this company had, like, wasted basically significant amount of money on all the stars that were now gone. right? And I'm not talking about just the ones that came in during the Hogan era, but even like Booker T and, you know, Kevin Nash, you know, they're not getting paid like $5. They're making some money. So the idea is like you have these people and now they're gone. So it's like, what return on investment did anyone get on Kevin Nash or on Booker T, right? They never really drew a dime. They could have if they were used during this era where they would be more valuable, right? Because now you're pushing it, you're going on Monday night, right? And it is conceivable that someone might say, oh, I'd rather watch Booker T and Scott Steiner versus John Cena and Randy Orton. That's conceivable. But ain't nobody tuning in to watch Desmond Wolfe, Nigel McGuinness, who's never drawn a dime in his entire career. Like, nobody's going to tune in to watch him. And sure as shit, nobody's tuning in to watch Garrett Bischoff. So, that's when TNA, in my opinion, failed miserably. And it was a failure that will go down in history as the biggest failure, in my opinion, in anything wrestling related. That is, of course, until AEW shits the bed a bit more, and then they're gone, you know what I mean? Because that's going to happen too. Best believe that's going to happen, cucks. That being said, take care of yourselves, and go fuck your mothers.